earned for the use of money by a bank. Simple interest is paid only on the initial principal of a savings account or on a loan. So here's our formula, and you're going to use this often in this lesson. And what it says is that the interest, I, is equal to P, and P stands for the principal. And the principal is the amount that you put in, okay? So it's usually amount in dollars. Then the second thing is the rate, okay? And the rate we have to change into a decimal when we use it. And finally, the time is going to be in number of years. Okay, so let's go ahead and try an example using that formula. Example number 1, find the simple interest to the nearest cent. Okay, so here's our information. We're going to put in $1,000. This is our principal, how much we start with. Okay, then we're going to put in, or we're going to have a rate of 4.5%. Now remember, we always have to change the rate into a decimal. So if you think back to lesson 45 that you did previously, to change a percent into a decimal, we start with 4.5%. To change that and get that to change into a decimal from a percent, we have to move the decimal point to the left 2 spaces. So when I do that, that's going to put a 0 in front of the 4, so it becomes 0.4045. Okay, and then last, we have our time. We're going to leave it in there for 2 years. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and use our formula. Remember, it's I equals P times R times T. Okay, so my interest is equal to the principal, which was 1,000, times the rate. Now remember, I need to use the decimal for the rate, not the percentage, so the decimal is 0.045, times the amount of time. How long do I leave it in there? 2 years. Okay, so of course you're going to have to use a calculator for this. I can't do this in my head, and I don't expect you to. So in my calculator, I'm going to type in 1,000 times 0.045 times 2. Okay, and when I do that, I get that the interest is equal to $90. So that means I'm going to make $90 if I leave that much money in the bank at that interest rate. And let's look at the original problem that says find the simple interest. So they want to know how much interest. There's my answer. Interest is $90. Example number 2. Same thing. Find the simple interest to the nearest cent. Okay, so we have our principal amount, how much we start with. Then we have our rate. Remember, the rate we have to change into a decimal. Okay, so we have 6.75%. To change that into a decimal, we move the decimal place to the left 2 times. Now there's an empty space there to fill with a 0, so it becomes 0.0675. And finally, the amount of years I'm going to leave it in there, that's my time. I'm going to leave it in for 3 years. Okay, so let's set up our equation. We have interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. So my interest is equal to my principal, which was $2,500, times the rate, which is the decimal part, the 0.0675, times the time, which is the 3 years. I'm going to leave it in 3 years. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to type that into my calculator. 2,500 times 0.0675 times the 3 for the years. And I get that my interest will be equal to, remember we're talking about money, $506.25. Interest is equal to $506.25. Okay, example number 3, same thing. Find the simple interest to the nearest cent. Okay, so let's find our information. Here's the P. The principal, we start with $2,250. It's at 6%. Remember, we got to change into a decimal. To do that, we have 6%. Right now, the decimal's behind the 6, so we're going to move it to the left 2 times. That means I have to add a 0 there, so it becomes 0.06 for the rate. And finally, my time, I leave it in there for 4 years. So interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. My principal is the $2,250. We're going to multiply that by the rate, which is 0.06. And then we're going to multiply that by the time, which is 4 years. Okay, so let's put this all in the calculator. We have 2,250 times 0.06 times 4 years. And that gives me an amount for my interest. It gives me exactly $540. So that's how much interest I would get, free money, basically, for leaving that much money in the bank for that long. Okay, last one more. Find the simple interest to the nearest cent. Let's find our information again. Here's our principal. We're going to start with $4,000. We have an interest rate of 4.25. Remember, we got to change that into the decimal. So when we change it 4.25%, we move the decimal to the left 2 times. We're going to have to add a 0 in the empty space, so it becomes 0.0425. And finally, the amount of years, I'm only going to leave it in for 1 year. Okay, so my interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. My principal is the 4,000. So I have 4,000 times the rate, which we changed to a decimal, it's 0.0425. And I'm going to multiply that times the time, which is 1 year. So let's type that into the calculator. 4,000 times 0.0425 times 1. Okay, and that tells me that my interest is exactly $170. Okay, so not a lot. I'm going to leave it in there for 1 year.